We'll call the meeting to order at 10:03. Thank you everyone for joining us. And I want to turn that closed. First order of business is to approve our minutes. Someone want to offer that motion?
I'll make a motion.
All right, made by Loretta. Jason, is that a second?
Yes.
Any discussion on the minutes? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Opposed say nay. And I will be an abstention because I'm pretty sure I was not here for that meeting. All right, next up, discussion of the VPA's June Academy proposal. So for those of you who weren't sure with an idea, whether a good idea or a bad idea, let me rephrase that. We're not categorizing what the idea is other than it's an idea. Was circulated, I think 2 meetings ago. We've asked for organizations to go to their representative constituencies, if you will, to get feedback or input on the Academy's proposal, which would extend the Level 2 Academy another week, offering EVOC training, consolidating defensive tactics training into the Phase 1 Academy, offering scenario-based training to the Level 2 Academy, and I think a couple other courses. Has everyone had an opportunity to look at this document? You see the commissioner shaking her head no. Would someone from Academy staff be willing to send the proposal over to her?
I can do that.
Thank you, Ken. And then in addition, it would extend the Level 2 Academy to become a Level 1-2 Academy. And so the first 2 weeks of the Level 1 Academy would be the same as the Level 2 Academy in its current existence as proposed, but they would not attend the third week. We began building out what the Phase 2 course requirements would be, which model state statute. For Level 1, I believe that adds in training for court, which Judiciary has said that they already have a curriculum designed and they would just submit it to the council for approval. And then several of the other areas would primarily be things that sheriffs are responsible for in practice. I did speak with the Sheriff's Association in broad strokes about this proposal, which the association supports and feels that it could create the curriculums and the instructor base for the Level 1 additional courses that don't currently exist. So with that, Commissioner, I know you're going to be seeing this for the first time, but those are kind of broad stroke overview that says what we could do in June that starts to alleviate some of the liability on the Academy, and also I think continues to build out the training for Level 1s and Level 2s, but then it also doesn't create a huge pinch on resources and agencies in trying to accomplish a mission today. Chris, have I summed that up?
I would say that's an accurate depiction of the conversation so far.
So we'll throw it on the table, and what do people think?
I will read it. When somebody sends it, it might not be today, but I will read it. As we craft things like this, are we floating them by people who actually rely on these folks to do their daily book of work? Like if we propose this, what would the impact be on a sheriff's department that works with mostly Level 2 officers, etc.?
So of the 7 sheriffs who are present in the meeting, they all agree that with the Level 1 proposal, so creating the curriculum that doesn't currently exist, it allows them to continue doing that work. And if they were to use Level 2s for more of a patrol capacity, having access to the Level 2 Academy would also make sense. So it kind of threads both needles from the sheriff's perspective.
And I'll say, I guess I miss. Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
No, I was just going to say, just for commissioner's information, we also looked at this third week as being more beneficial than it's 3 weeks right in a row. While that might be difficult for somebody who's looking to get into the profession first time, they have to come back for individual components to get all that stuff. And we're just uploading it in right in the very beginning. So there's less back and forth travel time that they have to make. It should be more cost efficient.
I will say the one concern, Jason, will go to you in a second. One concern that was raised by sheriffs was simply capacity and being able to deliver the courses. So the operationalization of it, making sure that we can get people into seats, and thinking about the long term. If we sent someone to level 1 in June and then we decide we want to elevate them to level 2, that there's a seat available come, say, the December Academy or whenever the next level 2 program would be. The same concern was raised about EVOC, just because we don't currently deliver it in service. I know Ken's been working hard to do that. It just hasn't really been seen to that end, but those I think are more the operational concerns as opposed to the broad proposal, which generally the sheriffs favor. Jason?
Thanks, Mark. I feel this is reasonable and I support it. If the academy can do it, if they have the resources, they can provide it and they're comfortable with this, I say go for it.
So Chris, I know that our charge is reviewing the curriculum, and I guess my question is our committee's role to make the recommendation to do this or operationalize doing this? How's that end of it work?
We'll be responsible for the operational end of it. I think what we want to make sure is that, we're speaking, excuse me, throughout this committee to make sure that you as the folks that would be impacted by this can speak to your constituencies and make sure that this is a program that works universally. It's meeting the need of what people are using level 2 for. It will definitely minimize the liability from our standpoint, simply because of the training that we don't give, and you're utilizing people to do that actual work. So that works from our end. I don't know if Domenica has any information that she'd like to share about that liability piece or not. And again, I know these are beginning steps. This isn't the final answer to everything, but this is a step in the right direction.
I think that that's the perspective of the Attorney General's office, is that this is addressing what needs to be addressed with the time that we have right now. So we support the plan.
Commissioner, does this impact DPS at all? Like, I don't even know what you have for auxiliary folks anymore.
We don't, our auxiliaries are all fully certified. We don't use level 2. So it doesn't impact us at all. But obviously we want to, want to be mindful of what's going on across the landscape, and so I really don't have a objection to this. Just at a quick look, thanks Ken for sending it. It certainly seems that it's better than the status quo. And as long as we're not resting on our laurels and saying this is as far as we're willing to push it, then I think, it's better than the status quo, and we should keep pressing to get to a place where people are comfortable that we've addressed the significant liability gaps. I think candidly that as long as we continue to use a system like this, there will always be liability gaps, but that's a choice we've made. Right? It's a choice we've made to allow a level 2 person to operate 40 hours a week as a patrol officer. And that's a liability decision that the CEO of each organization needs to make. So.
And Loretta, I know you and I spoke at the beginning where I cut you off. So what was your feedback there? I'm sorry about that.
No, I was just going to say that I guess I misunderstood, and I did not bring that to the Chiefs meeting that we had, but I will send an email out today and just getting some feedback from them.
Yeah, I think ultimately we're looking for a recommendation from this committee that we can bring forth to the council. And we've kind of looked at it from our end, from operational standpoint as to, you know, if we could do this, when could we do it? How soon could we do it? And part of that is that now the creation of the level one, and I know that the judiciary does have their own curriculum for the needs of those that will be working in the courtroom. But we also want to be mindful of what does that training look like for a level one officer? So if you're not working in the court, you're doing prisoner transports and, you know, perhaps vehicle escorts, things like that. We're not going to blend that into, well, you know, we've got a little bit of motor vehicle, now we can do level two work. It's going to be, we're tailoring it specific for level one. So we're making sure that we're providing whatever motor vehicle type of instruction is going to be needed to meet that demand.
So a question I do have, I have the VPA level one, level two combined proposal document. Did we ever have a training calendar that aligned with this proposal? Like what the phase one academy would look like? I know I played with it on my own, but I wasn't sure if VPA drafted one.
Ken did have one that he sent out to everybody.
I
There
just
should be a
couldn't find-
block schedule, Sheriff, that includes level one and level two basic academy, weeks 1, 2, and 3. And this falls in line with the desire to have 1 and 2, or weeks 1 and 2 be for anyone that was attending for the level 1 process. Week 3 would be for anyone that was continuing on with the level 2 process.
Would you mind resending that to me, Ken? I tried to find it and across all the email threads, I could not.
Will do.
Thank you. Now, Chris, as part of our recommend to the council, I assume that our report would be used for legislative ask for funding for EVOC and or the additional week. Do we need to capture that in our recommendation?
It would be great if you captured that in your recommendation because everything comes with a cost, right?
Can you provide us what the cost is, or do we just want to say this will need to be properly resourced and defer on what the number is?
Yeah, I think properly resourced is better than trying to come up with a number simply because we also have to make sure that, well, I know Ken has already done a large part of this is making sure that there's instructor availability to be able to meet this need, and we can derive some costs from that.
Okay. So I think it's, well, before I make my comment, is there anyone else who wants to speak to the proposal? And I assume since this is a VPA proposal, Academy staff is comfortable with it as presented?
Again, I think as a starting point, yes, I think we are. This is, it moves us in the right direction. It, you know, relinquishes some of the liability that we're having people do the work that they haven't been trained to do yet. So that's a step in the right direction. And then, you know, we move on from there. Like how do we build upon this?
So this would accomplish the short-term mission of our committee, which would then give us the more time to focus on the long-term goals, which would be our next charge. But that one doesn't probably have as much of a pressing time concern. Not to say time doesn't matter, but we don't need to get a recommend out now.
Yeah, I think that's a legitimate comment. I mean, I think we always want to keep moving wherever the direction is that we need to go. But there's not you know, that's not the race. I mean, this is something that we could actually do right in the beginning stages, and it'll make things better than what they currently exist. So the sooner we can act on something that is a shorter term goal, the better, and then give this committee some time to look at what the long range goals are.
So is there anyone willing to offer motion to make this recommendation to the council? Is that a proper motion for us to be making now, Chris?
I would say if everyone in the committee feels that that's appropriate to do, I think we were also looking for a written recommendation from the committee to bring forward to the council.
By written recommendation, you mean just framing up what that document represents and then
Yes.
adding a conclusion or a ending part saying that we need appropriate financial resources, et cetera.
Exactly.
So I can write up the recommendation. I'll send it out for a draft, just for everyone's eyes, but if someone's willing to make a motion that we adopt the VPA's proposal, then I can craft it.
I'll move that we accept the current VPA proposal.
I'll second.
Moved by Jason, seconded by Loretta. Any further discussion? Chris?
One other thought just came to my mind. I don't know why my brain is in neutral right now. We also talked about FTO hours. That was an additional part of this discussion. And I think we're going to be working with the FTO program in itself on our end for some documentation that we're currently not getting. And a lot of agencies are meeting the bare minimum requirements of FTO training. And that's something that while I've attempted nicely to frame it for some agency heads that this is really a basic minimum that you're meeting, and it doesn't, it would be problematic if an officer had a problem, and they're all good with it. You know, that the sooner they can get somebody on the road, the better. So I think the FTO program actually needs some additional work on our end, but I think that increasing the hours beyond the basic 60 hours for an FTO program is a legitimate concern. If you could see some of the FTO packets that come in here, you'd understand that.
And will we be targeting that for the June Academy, or is that being geared into our long-term work?
I would move that goes right into the June Academy as well. I mean, we're encouraging it already from our end, back to FTOs that are actually doing the work about what we're looking for documentation. We understand like not every certain, aspect that's in the paperwork for FTOs to complete is going to be completed, but there could be a lot more work and a lot more effort put on by FTOs. And I get that some FTOs are probably feeling that pressure from the agency head that as soon as they can get their person on the road, they need somebody on the road. We just want to make sure that we're not cheapening the process. If we're doing this to reduce liability, let's continue in that same mindset and give folks some more scrutiny before they're actually good to go on the road.
How often is the FTO program, the training to become an FTO, how often is that provided?
The academy does that once a year, every year in January. And then TC Pennington is responsible for doing the instructor updates throughout the year. We also have many agencies who still send folks out to either Roger Williams or GSC. And then if done so, they need to come back, meet with TC Pennington to ensure that all of the Vermont specific, both scope of authority and documentation is reviewed. At that point, Dan is able to certify them as an FTO for Vermont.
Will that course be posted for this coming January sometime soon?
It will.
Awesome.
If I can interject, Mark, I think Chief Covey has documentation about the last proposal for FTO hours. And if not, I do. If that helps the committee or if that helps moving forward with recommendation for the level 2 that was made to the council 2 years ago, 1 year ago, I've lost track.
I think almost 2 years ago.
Sure.
Jason? Not to put you on the spot.
Yeah, oh yeah. Along the same vein, we had a discussion last meeting about physical fitness testing, and I don't know if that should be included. Yeah, I may need an amended motion. Because I just thought of that too, that, if we're expanding the academy and they're doing more, that was a part of the attack report, was physical fitness testing should be included. But if we're expanding the training and they're doing more scenario-based training, it's going to be more physical by nature of the training. And I personally feel as though the same physical fitness standard should apply for entrance. We talked about it briefly last meeting.
Thank you once again, Jason, getting me out of neutral. And by the way, the PT requirement is in council rules for every level of training. And I have no explanation as to why it isn't being done for level 2, other than it's the way that it's always been done. But, we are law enforcement. We're going to start following the rules because that's what law enforcement does.
Kim?
I'm wondering if a way forward would be to address the first motion to accept the VPA's recommendation as far as the level 1, level 2 course, and then FTO being another topic for this group to discuss, and then either yay or nay, and then the physical fitness. And then this group could have a few recommendations to go forward. Or, I mean, you could look at it as a full package, but you could also break it up into a few pieces. And just to note, last meeting, the FTO hour conversation occurred, and at least everyone present at the last meeting had agreed, did not vote on it, but by consensus had recommended that level 1 have 60 hours, level 2, or sorry, level 1, someone said 50, but I think that may have been an accident, but 50 to 60 hours, level 2 be double that. But then there was a conversation about, let's really think through what those hours, what we're looking for, and like work our way backwards. So that conversation had started last week, but hadn't finished. And I could see that being a longer conversation potentially for this group to go forward with.
Thank you for being a step ahead of me, Kim. So Jason, I know you said you want, or we're considering amending your motion, but are you comfortable with moving forward with these as individual?
That sounds great to me.
Any further discussion before we call a vote? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. All right, I'm going to assume that's an old hand. All right, it is unanimous. All right, so FTO hours. I apologize, I was not at the last meeting, so I did not hear that. I did not talk to sheriffs at all, so I don't know where they're at. I can give you my personal feeling, which is I don't care. I think it's better to have more hours, and at least for my agency, we do more hours, but I'm not sure I know where to go with that conversation representing the sheriffs. Jason, are you circulating? Was it a document that you had?
So I'm not sure. I looked in the original level 2 proposal from 2022, but I haven't found anything about FTO hours in there. Ken, do you know where we got this from?
I don't remember what the document that was submitted to the council might have been from the TAC, but I will see if I can find it.
I'll look through mine as well.
A question I have, and this might be work to be done. We have the phase 2 classes covered, but I don't think I've seen what the FTEP 2 would look like for phase 1. I'm sorry, for level 1 or level 2. Has that not been created yet?
I think the FTEP you're talking about the standards checklist?
I think so. The
Yes, sir.
27-page document.
Yes, sir. I believe the intent was to keep the level 2 as is. I think the level 1 is part of the modification and the redesign that will have to take place with those additional instructors for transport, court security, et cetera.
So would it be the intent that we reduce that document for level 1 and then refocus it towards the work that they're doing if it's not already captured?
My belief is that we'll absolutely have to do that. I think there are many portions of that that will no longer be applicable to someone who's simply working in that scope. I think that's both a discussion and a draft review that this committee may want to look at after all of the players have been identified and able to submit what they believe will be appropriate curriculum.
So do we have any basis for the 50 or 60 hours, or is that just kind of well, it's what we've done, so let's keep going with it? Kim?
I think that was exactly the question raised at the last meeting, that, currently we have 60 hours for level 2. Would it make sense for that to be what is the minimum for level 1 and then increasing level 2? But we had then discussed that we need to build out that level 1 and really see whether those hours make sense. And at the last meeting, we were hoping Rob would be able to be here for this meeting so that we could see, what they already have, and then so we can see how much more needs to be done and what those hours would look like. So that's definitely work that needs to be done.
Yeah, I'd imagine just having sent people through their trainings, their program is geared more towards phase 2. So what we're delivering in the phase 3 FTO and with that checklist, I think hasn't been developed yet. So I'm just sitting here wondering, what would it take me to train a person to be a court officer? And trying to come up with a number. I'm not sure I can pinpoint what that number would be. I think level 1's a little bit harder for me to pick where that number would be. Level 2, I think, is easier to discuss because we all have our hands wrapped around that. Does anyone think I'm off base in thinking that? So should we consider the FTO proposal just around level 2 right now as we build out level 1 and bring that up at a later date?
Mark, are you suggesting that the potential is there that FTO hours would be less than 60 for a level 1?
I don't know what the number of hours would be for FTO. I couldn't say that this makes sense to accomplish what we need to do without knowing what that FTEP looked like. For those of you not familiar, this is currently a 27-page document of all the topics a FTO works with the trainee to go over the things that they would need to do. On level 2, that covers laws, it covers response to types of calls. So I'm just trying to think out how significant or insignificant this document would be in terms of volume to effectively train a person.
I mean, I think about, again, it hasn't been developed yet what level 1 looks like, but what comes to my mind is all of the things that are not being currently trained in for courtroom security, and all of that would include use of force, de-escalation. I don't know how involved sheriffs get in, whether it's facilitating like the service of RFA orders at a courthouse, or making sure that parties are separate when they come in for the family court, and then training around prisoner transport and then vehicle escorts. I could certainly see that filling up 60 hours, but that's just me.
What I'd hate to see, though, is somebody do 60 hours of vehicle escorts.
Sure.
I mean, it's driving a car for 60 hours, and when you're going 30 in a 50-mile-an-hour zone with your blue lights on, that's kind of wasted training time. But at the same time, that would satisfy the hour requirement. It just...
Well, here's where the caveat comes in, right? That would satisfy the hour requirement, but that's where it's on us to say, is this really an example of what somebody needs for level 1 training. If you're going to have 50 hours in courtroom security and 1 to 2 hours of prisoner transport and the rest in vehicle escorts, that's not legitimate, right? And that should be upon us to say, sorry, but that doesn't cut it. I think, you could even break it up into prescribed hours, I think, if you wanted to, about how much for each component of level 1 training. But I think from our perspective, what I'm seeing is a lot of, my agency doesn't do this, so I'm not going to train to that, and I'm just going to discuss it. Okay, well, that's all well and good, but if that person leaves your agency and then goes to another agency, and they assume that they have that level of FTO training be under their belt already, that's really something that agency won't be able to articulate unless they get the records from the initial hiring agency. So again, those are things that you could certainly bring up in whatever you decide is the correct hourly requirement for a level 1.
So just from my perspective, Chris, I think because of this discussion, it makes sense that we take a little time to muckle around level 1. As long as that doesn't create an issue for the academy and timing, maybe we can address that in our next meeting, but we deal with level 2 right now since we have our hands around this pretty good. Would that be acceptable to you?
If you're asking just me, I think that, this is if we're going to create a process of level 1, and it's already in the existing framework of what the level 2 academy looks like now, I don't see that as a heavy lift other than coming up with the curriculum that's taught specifically for level 1. I think that makes more sense to try to do that at the same time that we're making a change rather than to kind of piecemeal that and stagger that along. But that's just my opinion. See a lot of other hands raised here.
Anthony, then Dominica.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that we need to train to a standard, not specifically to agree, not to an agency, to whatever the standard is that we're looking for. So I think that's just a huge problem of people coming from other agencies, and the assumption is they're certified and they can do it when the reality is they can't.
Dominica?
And this is just a question. On those FTO hours, there's currently no requirement in level 1 for that? Is that right?
Level 1 doesn't even exist right now. It does in statute, but there is
Right.
not a training for level 1 yet.
So if we're going to say that, it sounds like, we set the marker of that 60 hours, if that's what we think is the minimum, and that's on an 8-hour shift, that's like a week and a half, of this kind of training, then we just fill out those hours. It sounds like we have plenty of topics to fill out those hours, but I think it's important as a statement, just saying the expectation would be this. And if the minimum is the 60, then we fill it up, and that's a starting point to say, we might need more, but that this is the minimum and this is what we think is important to address those concerns that have been identified.
Jason?
I just reviewed the TAC report of 2022, and we mentioned that the FTO for level 2 is set at 60 hours, but we don't ever recommend expansion. I looked through all my notes of all our meetings and I don't see that we discussed it. So doesn't mean we didn't, but Ken, if you find some other source, I don't know that we as a TAC voted to recommend an increase of that. I certainly support it here now, but I don't think we tackled that specifically.
Is the
I'm not sure.
recommendation of, go ahead, Ken.
Sorry to interrupt, Sheriff. I think the recommendation after proposed to the council was a doubling of the current FTO to bring it to 120 hours. I think that's what was proposed to the council, although I don't know if that was in draft or written form, or if that was based on discussion after the presentation of the reporting by the TAC. And then we know that following that, there was never a vote, or there was never a proposal introduced at that time.
So is this a recommendation that's suited for our committee or for TAC?
I feel like it's appropriate for this committee personally, since we're tackling level 2. And it's a liability concern. It is part of that overarching liability theme and the training.
And certification.
If I could too, I'm just kind of quickly trying to look through different notes around the TAC recommendation. And Jason, I think it was when you had your survey results from when you reached out to agencies. There was one of the slides there asking how many hours do you require of level 2. 5% of the agencies said 100+ hours. 27.5% said 120+ hours. There were 12% that said 60 or plus. So 12% of agencies were reaching the bare minimum.
I think at minimum, as a starting point, doubling it is reasonable. We're only talking about, that's 3 weeks at an 8-hour shift. At Middlebury, we don't calculate by hours. We calculate by number of shifts. We do 12-hour shifts, but we don't use level 2 either. So that's not an apples and apples comparison. But I think at minimum 120 should be a starting point.
I think 120 for level 1 and then maybe 240 for level 2. That's doubling it for the level 2.
Anthony?
I just think, why not raise it? I mean, the burden is not on the academy, it's on the agency, which is, I think, where it should be. If you're going to be working for that agency, they should invest that time in you.
I think the only thing I would say around that proposition is to take it to the people who actually rely on level 2 and ask what the impact would be. Because we might not know what the impact would. I certainly don't know what that would look like for an organization that had to double their FTO hours.
Yeah, I can say it pretty plainly. It's going to double the investment for the training. So there's going to be a cost pushback.
This really all depends on, like, so for instance, that's why we wanted this committee put together and having a recommendation, because we want those that are represented out there and actually responsible for these folks to weigh in and have some, good input. Because quite honestly, like I feel like that there are times when I'm trying to thread this needle about what is the reality that agencies are facing, and I do understand that, and then what is the bare minimum responsibility from us here at the academy. And I keep coming back to when I hear the struggles or the costs or all those things, and I truly do understand that's a reality. We're the ones given the certification, so it falls on us, and that's the balance that we have to get agencies to understand, and understand that it's in their best interest that they're receiving somebody that's getting better training before they actually are allowed to go out and do what they need to do. Here's where the good feedback will come from agency heads and people on this committee is, how strongly do you support that? And that's a mindset. That's not just lip service. We're already sending some things back that we're getting from FTOs because they're like, they might meet the minimum, but really, like, come on. There has to be some pushback from us. We're the ones that are granting certification. And I think the council I would like to think that the council would feel the same way.
So I don't want to come off as sounding oppositional to the change in it. I want to be very clear that representing the sheriffs, I have no idea where they're at because I never had this conversation with them. So my concern is only to the commissioner's point. how does this impact other organizations? I'm but one of 14. And anyone who knows sheriffs know that each of our departments operates a little bit differently. So my personal opinion is, yeah, no problem. But at the same time, I don't know what 13 others would say. And to Anthony's point from earlier, we have a standard that we're training to. We really don't. I mean, I could say 1, 2, 3 vehicle escorts probably sufficient to train a person to do vehicle escorts, which isn't a lot. But then our standard could say, well, I signed them off with their 60 hours of training, which they only did vehicle escorts. They have no experience with court security, no experience with this. So we haven't really defined what that standard is. And even if we broke it out saying you need 20 hours in a courtroom, 20 hours on an escort, 20 hours directing traffic, like whatever those things would be, we haven't developed what that standard is. So that's my hesitation on level 1 is to say, do we have a standard? We have a checklist that hasn't been developed yet, but we don't really have a standard. With level 2, I feel we're closer to a standard, but the problem with level 2 being of the 27-page documents, I forget how many items that we target. Let's say it's, what, 200, Ken? Ish.
At
So
least.
we have 200-ish different areas that we cover, but it's at an FTO's discretion to determine, did they discuss it, did they demonstrate it, or did they perform it? And even that's left open for discretion of an agency, which then replicates the same issue that we're talking about, which is that we don't have people trained to a standard. And so for my agency, where we discussed 1/3 of the items, but never did the other things, for that person to now go work for Loretta, and she needs them to do those 1/3 of things we only discussed, we still have the same certification, but not the same standard. So that's the concern I raise. Loretta?
I was just gonna say, if we don't, what's the cost gonna be if we don't train somebody properly later on down the road and they get in trouble or they get sued or God forbid they end up shooting somebody or I don't think that we can, say that we don't want to put the training in because of costs. And I know cost is an issue, but I think we have to look at the bigger picture.
Anthony?
Yeah, I mean, the level 3 is there's a theoretical equivalency that, we don't have a minimum because theoretically the person's coming out with the ability to be out on the road. But I mean, given the training of a potential level 1 or a level 2, I just can't see how a week and a half would ever be sufficient, given what anybody in a uniform carrying a gun could possibly get into, no matter what they're doing. It seems like such a short amount of time. I mean, just any job. I mean, it's going to take a week training at Jiffy. And remember getting your computer set up and key fobs, and it's going to eat up most of the week right there. And the reality is most of the agencies aren't going to be getting into the beef of anything until week 2, which really doesn't exist with the current FTO model.
Loretta?
Sorry, I just want to point out too that some of this is an issue with the FTO program, and not necessarily with the level 1, level 2 curriculum. I think we need to train our FTOs be better and and that's some of the checklist, maybe some things we need to go over the checklist and say, hey, this is the stuff that you can discuss, but doesn't necessarily have to, I mean, like policies, we can discuss those, right? We don't have to demonstrate but maybe go through the checklist and say, yeah, these are the things that you absolutely have to demonstrate. They need to, perform. I mean, not everybody has to perform everything, but we should say, yeah, have a line that we need to be above. If that makes sense.
It does. So I think we've opened Pandora's box on FTO. And I think the question I pose, one is short-term and one is long-term. But for the sake of the discussion we've had, I think the FTO program is a long-term issue we need to address. And so to accomplish the short-term goal of saying there is a standard for level one, as well as there's at least been reflection on increasing level two. Do we want to move forward with at least setting our minimums right now, which sounds like in last meeting it was 60 for level one and was it 100 for level two? I'm asking, I wasn't there.
I believe it was 120. It was
120,
double
yeah.
what it is now.
So do we want to move forward with a recommendation such as that, and then we pick this up as some of our longer term work? And does that mitigate liability issues in taking that approach?
I won't speak for your committee, but that sounds like a plan moving forward. I think just increasing those hours is gonna, doesn't take away liability, but it certainly shows that you're working in the right direction. And then if through the process we find out that that number changes because we need specific training in what a level one does and it doesn't meet that 60-hour requirement, or it can be done in less, so be it. But that's a further discussion from the folks that will actually be the practitioners of that level.
I see some head nods.
I think, again, just like with our previous vote, it's a starting point. That we at minimum double it. And, you know, we're crawling, we're walking before we run. And I agree with what Loretta said. I mean, 240, we have a number. Anything is better than what we have now. And it's demonstrating the message that, yes, this is serious. This doesn't mean this is the way it needs to be forever. Perhaps it does get increased again. But to keep in mind, I'm cautious what I say because my agency doesn't use level two. And I don't want to be asserting too much sway in this meeting when I'm not familiar with the program really. But I think 120, again, to use the word reasonable, is a reasonable starting point.
And also, let me just point out that there are a lot of agencies that do much more than the minimum training hours. And we appreciate those. I mean, you can see the difference in those FTO packets that come in. The real concern is about for folks that are struggling and folks that just want to put somebody in the courtroom security because that's where they need them. And this is not a reflection of just sheriff's departments, but like, I need this person for this specific goal. I'm going to do the bare minimum that I need to get them there. And I expect them, they can work 2 weeks from now, they'll be ready to go. That's the thing that we want to move away from. We want to move towards a legitimate FTO program that really kind of rounds out at a minimum the training that folks are getting before they're actually doing the job.
But the one thing I would just say, as a sheriff's department that does a lot of the work that's being discussed with level one, the level two curriculum doesn't really ever address any of the things we do. So the bare minimum of the certification might be accomplished by some agencies, but then further steps are taken in the areas that aren't even really contemplated by the level two certification program as it is, which is why the judiciary has their training program built out. Sheriff's departments build out their own on their own. And so to the conversation of certification, it might be meeting the minimum standard that we're setting, but then to the point of performing the job, which is what the certification really is enabling, they're getting built out in other ways. It's just not vetted through the academy because it doesn't exist. So what's the will of the group? Do we want to make a motion now? Do we want to table this in light of the discussion? Do we want to do something else? Ken?
Just a thought as we keep going down the road. And I think it's echoing what Commissioner Morrison said earlier about reaching out to those agencies that do utilize level 2 and verifying that we're not creating something that's going to be untenable for folks. I think one of the concerns that I have, and one of the potential unintended consequences, are the constabulary in Vermont and what voice they may need to bring to the table so that we can at least say that straight faced, we've heard their concerns, if any, and appreciate where they're coming from with perhaps not having an FTO process that's other than someone else's FTO process. My understanding is that most constables in the state are either trained by a single constable who rolls around and does that where they can, or by contracting with either municipal agencies or with sheriff's departments. Given that, I think we need to either reach out and or hear something from them before we go too much further.
Do the constables still have an association?
I believe they do. It's been some time that we've interacted with them here. But I believe they do.
Loretta, do you know who that is? To their president or chair
It
or
used to be
whatever?
Mark Belisle. I'm not sure. I can reach out to him and find out if he's still or find a contact for them.
I don't want to misinterpret any of that, in that I think there should be some allowances given for them. I think this is at a minimum something that every agency that's incorporating level 2 into their departments needs to address. But I also know that the warden service was for a time discussing bringing deputy wardens back into the fold. They might be level 2 certified. I've reached out to Colonel Stedman. I'm waiting to have that discussion with him later today. But before we jump too deep into it, I want to make sure that those parties that might still utilize level 2 have at least had the opportunity to hear what the discussion is all about.
And let's not forget that we have some elected constables and some appointed constables. That also, we have problems with the reporting back to us and even knowing sometimes where constables are. So all those things play into what Ken was just talking about there. That's another, that is another problem. I don't know how constables that are the only elected official in their town, how some of them will receive FTO training, if not for the graces of a full service agency being able to provide it for them.
So with 4 minutes left, it seems appropriate that we invite, I guess, those groups in to our meeting next week. Are we meeting next week? Our meeting next week. Do we want to set a minimum standard for level 1, since that at least would, based on, it sounds like the original discussion would at least set a standard as we move forward with our recommendation? I see Domenica nodding her head emphatically, yes.
Yeah,
I'll
no,
make
I
a-
think it's important to make that as a decision that we support. How that kind of shakes out and how that fills out, I think, is up for discussion. But I think setting the standard of where we think it should be really goes at least to addressing some of the issues that we're trying to tackle.
I'll make a motion that we set it for 60 hours. And with the caveat that obviously we have to come up with a training program for that and the checklist.
So can I offer a friendly amendment, Loretta, that we say
Sure.
set level 1?
Level 1,
260
yes. Level 1. Thank you.
Is there a second? Second by Domenica. Any further discussion? All right, all in favor, say aye or raise a hand.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay or raise a hand. And it passes unanimously. All right, with 3 minutes, I don't think we're going to get to our draft report. is there any public comment to be made?
Or is there going to be a motion for a minimum number of hours for level 2 or no?
I think that's where we're saying we're going to bring that back next week, and
Okay.
invite the constables in. I can float the question to the sheriff, so I can at least speak intelligently on their behalf. And I'm not sure who else we want to be considering in that. Loretta, do you want to run that by the chiefs? Is there any other entities that use level 2 that we're not thinking of?
Sheriff, I can let you know what Colonel Stedman says in reference to deputy wardens, if that's going to come back or not. Beyond that, I'm not aware of any other level 2 agencies throughout the state.
Do Mark and Loretta, do either of your associations have meetings before your joint one in December?
We just had
No.
ours.
We just had ours too. But
Okay.
I'll send an email out today for everybody.
Okay.
And I'll do the same. Any further public comment? Hearing none, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Loretta. Second by Jason. All in favor, say aye. Happy Monday, everybody.
Having a great
Thank
week.
you.
Be safe.
Everyone.